History often remembers victories as clashes of armies. Steel against steel, numbers against numbers. But some wars are decided long before the first sword is raised. The war between Vlad III of Wallachia and the Ottoman Empire was one of those conflicts. Its true battlefield was not a plain or a fortress, but the human mind. To understand how a small principality dared to resist the most powerful empire of the 15th century, we must begin not with an army, but with a boy. Vlad III was born into a world shaped by fear. Wallachia sat on the fault line between two civilizations, Christian Europe to the north and the expanding Ottoman Empire to the south. It was not a kingdom of wealth or power, but a buffer state. For empires, buffer states exist to be used, punished, or erased. Vlad's father, Vlad II Dracul, ruled Wallachia under constant pressure. Loyalty to Hungary meant Ottoman invasion. Loyalty to the Ottomans meant rebellion at home. To ensure obedience, the Ottomans demanded hostages. In 1442, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were taken to the Ottoman court. Vlad was 11 years old. For 4 years he lived among the enemy, not as a guest but as leverage. Any sign of rebellion from his father could mean torture or execution. Every smile in the court carried threat. Every lesson came with humiliation. But while Radu adapted, Vlad observed. He learned Turkish fluently. He memorized guard rotations, punishment rituals, military ranks, and court politics. He watched how obedience was enforced and how fear maintained order. He saw boys taken and reshaped into janissaries, elite soldiers who knew nothing but loyalty to the Sultan. Most importantly, Vlad learned this. The Ottoman Empire did not rely on mercy. It relied on reputation. Fear was not a side effect of Ottoman power. It was the foundation of it. When Vlad eventually returned to Wallachia, he was no longer a boy. He was a ruler forged by captivity. And he ruled with the same understanding he had learned firsthand. Control the mind, and the body will follow. By the time Mehmed II rose to power, the Ottomans had become unstoppable. In 1453, Constantinople fell. A city that had resisted conquest for 1,000 years collapsed under Ottoman cannons. The shockwave traveled across Europe. Kings panicked. Borders tightened. Churches prayed. Mehmed II was only 21, yet he had achieved the impossible. His confidence was absolute. To him, Wallachia was insignificant, a strip of land that existed only to delay the inevitable. But Vlad did not see inevitability. He saw opportunity. In 1456, Vlad took the throne of Wallachia. His rule began brutally. Rival nobles were impaled. Criminals were executed publicly. Corruption was punished without mercy. His goal was simple, absolute internal control. To outsiders, it looked like madness. To Vlad, it was preparation. In 1459, the Ottomans sent envoys demanding tribute. Gold and 500 boys for the Janissary Corps. It was the same system that had stolen Vlad's childhood. This time, Vlad refused. He invited the envoys to dine. When they refused to remove their turbans, Vlad responded with cold politeness. His men nailed the turbans to their skulls. The envoys died screaming. This act was not random cruelty. It was a declaration of war written in blood. Vlad wanted Mehmed to understand something immediately. Wallachia would not behave like other vassals. Mehmed was furious, but not alarmed. He had crushed far greater threats. Wallachia would be handled in time. That time came in the winter of 1461. Before the main Ottoman army even mobilized, Vlad launched a campaign of terror along the border. Ottoman patrols vanished. Garrisons were slaughtered in their sleep. Supply depots burned. Vlad kept meticulous records, names, dates, locations. Nearly 24,000 Ottomans and collaborators were killed before the invasion began. The message was deliberate. You are not safe anywhere. This was psychological warfare at its earliest stage. Vlad was shaping expectations, planting unease, spreading rumors faster than armies could march. When Mehmed finally prepared his campaign in 1462, he assembled one of the largest armies the region had ever seen. Estimates vary, but at least 100,000 soldiers crossed the Danube. Some sources claim more. Cannons that had shattered Constantinople rolled north. Siege engines followed. Supply trains stretched for miles. This was total war. Against this force, Vlad could field barely 30,000 men, many of them peasants. On paper, resistance was suicide. But Vlad was not planning a conventional war. He knew Ottoman doctrine. He knew their reliance on supply lines, discipline, and momentum. Most importantly, he knew their greatest weakness. They believed victory was inevitable. And inevitability breeds complacency. As the Ottomans marched into Wallachia, they found nothing. Villages burned, wells poisoned, crops destroyed, livestock gone. The land itself had been turned into a weapon. Ottoman soldiers, used to feeding off conquered territory, began to starve. Disease spread. Morale weakened. Still, Mehmed pushed forward. What he didn't know was that Vlad had already won the first phase of the war. Hatred had become strategy. Fear had become infrastructure. The stage was set. And soon, the night itself would turn against the Ottoman Empire. By June of 1462, the Ottoman army believed it was marching toward inevitable victory. The land was ruined, yes. Disease had begun to spread, yes. But none of that mattered. Numbers always decide wars. Or so they believed. What Sultan Mehmed II did not realize was that Vlad had no intention of fighting a normal war. The scorched earth, the disappearances, the sickness. None of it was meant to stop the Ottomans completely. It was meant to prepare them, to exhaust them, to confuse them, to make them afraid of the dark. The Ottoman army camped deep inside Wallachia, stretching across miles of land. Tens of thousands of tents. Campfires burning like stars on the earth. Guard posts arranged by regulation. Janissaries forming the disciplined corps. Cavalry units resting on the flanks. Supply wagons clustered behind. In daylight, this force was invincible. At night, it was vulnerable. Vlad knew this because he had lived among them. During his years as a hostage, he had learned Ottoman camp routines, how guards rotated, how passwords were used, how discipline depended on clarity and order. Remove clarity and discipline collapsed. But Vlad needed absolute certainty. So he did something almost unimaginable. On the night of June 16th, Vlad disguised himself as an Ottoman merchant. Dressed in Turkish clothing, speaking flawless Ottoman Turkish, he entered the enemy camp alongside a handful of trusted scouts. If discovered, he would be executed instantly. Inside the camp, Vlad moved calmly. His eyes catalogued everything. He memorized tent layouts, noted supply depots, identified officer quarters. He watched how guards challenged strangers, and how often they didn't. Then he found the most important detail of all. Ottoman night security relied heavily on verbal identification. Each sector had passwords, but recognition depended more on language than faces. In darkness, hearing perfect Turkish was often enough. Vlad understood immediately. The Ottomans had built a fortress of numbers, but left the gates unlocked at night. He returned to his camp with a plan so audacious that even his own commanders hesitated. He would attack. Not with 30,000 men. Not with half his army. With just 7,000 cavalry. This would not be a battle. It would be an eruption. Vlad divided his force into small, highly disciplined units. Each group received specific objectives: officer tents, supply wagons, gunpowder stores. They would not fight prolonged engagements. They would strike, scream, burn, and vanish. The goal was not to defeat the Ottomans physically. The goal was to break their sense of control. As midnight approached, the Wallachian cavalry prepared in silence. Horses' hooves were wrapped in cloth to mute sound. Armor was blackened to avoid reflection. Weapons were sharpened not for duels, but for killing in confusion. There was no speech, no promise of survival. They all understood most would not return. At exactly 1 a.m, the attack began. First came infiltration. Vlad's Turkish-speaking scouts slipped through the perimeter, using the passwords he had learned. They moved like ghosts, cutting horse tethers, loosening tent stakes, and placing slow-burning fuses among the gunpowder wagons. Then the night exploded. Massive detonations ripped through the camp. Fireballs climbed into the sky. Horses panicked. Tents collapsed. Soldiers stumbled from their sleep into chaos. And then the cavalry charged. 7,000 riders struck from multiple directions at once. Ottoman perimeter guards died before alarms could be raised. Crossbows fired at point-blank range. Lances pierced shadows. But here was the true genius. The attackers shouted in Turkish. False orders echoed through the camp. The Sultan is under attack. Defend the supply wagons. Form ranks to the east. Ottoman soldiers rushed to respond. Straight into each other. In the darkness, uniforms meant nothing. Language meant everything. Units collided. Janissaries clashed with cavalry. Friendly fire spread panic faster than the enemy ever could. The camp became a nightmare of sound and flame. Screams in Turkish and Romanian blended together. Orders contradicted orders. Officers were cut down before they could restore control. Loose horses trampled men underfoot. Fire spread uncontrollably through the tents. The Ottoman army was fighting itself. At the heart of the chaos, Vlad led a spearhead of elite cavalry toward the ultimate target, Sultan Mehmed's pavilion. This was the decisive moment. If Mehmed died, the invasion ended instantly. Vlad's men cut through the confusion with terrifying speed. Guards fell. Blood soaked the earth. The massive pavilion with golden crescents came into view. They burst inside. But the Sultan was not there. Mehmed had moved his tent earlier, a precaution learned from years of campaigning. Inside, Vlad found the Grand Vizier instead. The opportunity was gone. Now the risk was absolute. The Janissaries, elite and disciplined even in chaos, began to regroup. Steel walls formed. Drums beat. Order slowly returned. Vlad had only one choice. He ordered the retreat. Horns sounded across the camp, the signal to withdraw. Wallachian units disengaged and melted back into the darkness, leaving behind fire, corpses, and disbelief. By dawn, the scale of destruction became clear. At least 15,000 Ottoman soldiers were dead, killed by attackers, by explosions, by friendly fire. Hundreds of supply wagons burned. Commanders lay dead. Disease-ridden wounded filled the medical tents. The army that had gone to sleep confident woke up traumatized. Mehmed too survived, but something had changed. He had faced many enemies. He had never faced this. The night attack did not defeat the Ottoman army. It did something far more dangerous. Proved that they were not safe. And once fear enters an army's mind, it never truly leaves. But Vlad was not finished. The night attack was not the climax. It was the setup. The Ottoman army, shaken and furious, continued marching toward Targovist. What awaited them there would break even the conqueror of Constantinople. The Ottoman army marched toward Targovist in silence. What remained of their confidence had burned in the night attack. Soldiers no longer joked around campfires. Men slept with weapons in hand. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound carried threat. Sultan Mehmed too pushed his army forward relentlessly. Delay meant danger. The longer they remained in Wallachia, the more the land seemed to consume them. Disease weakened the ranks. Supplies were short. Discipline held, but only barely. Mehmed believed one thing still favored him: numbers. If he could force Vlad into open battle, the outcome would be inevitable. What he did not know was that Vlad had never intended to fight that battle. As the Ottoman vanguard crested the final ridge outside Targovist, they slowed. Then they stopped completely. The silence spread backward through the ranks. Men stared ahead, frozen. Before them stood something no battlefield had ever seen. First, it looked like a forest. Thousands of tall wooden poles rose from the earth in precise rows, stretching across the plain. But there were no leaves, no branches, only bodies, 20,000 stakes, and on every single one a corpse. The smell hit first. In the heat of early summer, decay hung thick in the air. Flies swarmed so densely they formed dark clouds above the field. The buzzing never stopped, like the land itself was screaming. Veteran soldiers, men who had stormed cities and watched thousands die, fell to their knees. Others retched. Some wept openly. This was not chaos. This was design. The bodies were arranged deliberately. Ottoman soldiers recognized faces. Officers impaled higher than common troops. Allies separated from enemies. The stakes grew taller toward the center, forming a horrific amphitheater. And at its highest point sat a figure every man in the army recognized. Hamza Pasha, Mehmed's most trusted general, his close friend, a man who had vanished months earlier. Now he sat impaled on the tallest stake, armor polished, beard trimmed, positioned so his dead eyes looked out over the approaching army. Vlad had saved him for this moment. This was not punishment. It was a message. Each stake represented hours of labor. Each body was placed with intention. This was not madness, it was patience, calculation, control. The forest spoke clearly. This is what happens to those who come here. Mehmed rode forward alone. His expression did not change, but witnesses recorded that he stared at Hamza's body for a long time. The conqueror of Constantinople had seen death. He had never seen this. He understood something instantly. This was not a man who could be broken through force alone. Vlad had transformed terror into architecture, into landscape, into identity. And Vlad had done something worse than killing soldiers. He had shown that he knew them, their ranks, their origins, their commanders. The implication was devastating. If you stay, you will all be here. Then came the final psychological blow. From the city walls of Targovist, soft voices rose into the air, children singing, an Orthodox church choir, chanting hymns. The contrast shattered what little composure remained. Innocence and horror collided in the mind. Some soldiers crossed themselves. Others backed away instinctively. Even the janissaries, trained to fear nothing, shifted uneasily. This was no longer a campaign. It was a curse. Mehmed turned to his commanders. Accounts differ on his exact words, but the meaning was clear and consistent. A man who does this cannot be conquered. Then came the order no one expected. Retreat. Not reposition, not probe, not regroup. Full withdrawal. The Ottoman army, still numerically superior, turned around. The conqueror of Constantinople abandoned the campaign. As the retreat began, fear replaced discipline. Soldiers believed Vlad watched from every tree line. Supplies were abandoned to move faster. Units broke formation. Panic spread. And Vlad did not let them leave peacefully. His remaining cavalry, barely 6,000 men, harassed the retreat relentlessly. Night raids, ambushes, stragglers impaled and left along the road like mile markers. The forest followed them. By the time the Ottomans crossed back over the Danube, they were no longer an invading force. They were survivors. The campaign vanished from Ottoman court poetry. Chroniclers minimized it. Victories were celebrated elsewhere. Silence became admission. But Europe noticed. Wallachia survived. More than that, it became feared. Vlad had not won through strength. He had not defeated the Ottoman army in open battle. He had done something far more effective. He destroyed their certainty. Empires expand because they believe resistance is futile. Vlad proved resistance could be worse than defeat. The psychological impact rippled outward. Ottoman campaigns in the region slowed. Future sultans approached the Balkans with caution. Wallachia's reputation became its greatest defense. And from this moment, history transformed Vlad into something else. A legend. Over centuries, stories twisted. Terror became superstition. Impalement became vampirism. Vlad Dracula emerged not because he drank blood, but because he understood fear better than anyone of his time. The truth is darker than fiction. Vlad learned in captivity that empires run on confidence. Break that confidence, and even the greatest armies hesitate. The forest of the impaled was not about cruelty. It was communication. Each stake said, "Victory here costs more than it's worth." Mehmed too lived. He ruled for years, but he never returned to Wallachia. Sometimes history turns not on battles, but on moments when one man shows another the true price of conquest. That summer of 1462, 30,000 men defeated 150,000. Not with steel, but with understanding, with will, and with the terrifying realization that some enemies are better avoided than conquered.